Okay,
We will officially call the DAB meeting to order at 4:10. The agenda.
I put it in the chat here in Zoom. Just wanted a quick reference.
That's great. Thank you. I just see nothing. Should I? But I have the meeting packet right here. Do we want to share a screen and kind of roll through this?
Through the approval of the minutes or through the,
Just through the agenda. Just have it up on the screen. You guys want me to share this? Or you guys have it all pulled up?
Yeah, I think it's just in the chat. It's pretty.
I don't see it in the chat for some reason.
webinar chat.
Maybe because I joined after you shared it.
Let me reshare it in here and see if that works. Okay, now do you see that one?
No, I see it. Yeah.
Okay, that is what it is.
Okay. Approval of the minutes. So did anybody have any edits for the minutes, or does somebody want to make a motion for approval? So how are we going to get this done?
the April meeting, Matthew and I recused ourselves, so it would be
Oh, okay.
smaller quorum.
I move that we approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Need to hear a vote on the approval, or maybe your audio, Rory?
Can you hear me?
No, I can hear
Yeah,
you.
it was kind of bouncing out a little bit.
Yeah. So we have the May 8th meeting minutes. Any revisions? Or does somebody want to make a motion for approval?
I move that we approve the May 8th minutes.
I'll second that, even though you weren't there, Stephen, or at least it says you weren't there.
I motion to approve and second.
Yeah.
I'll fill one of those roles.
Okay. Let's roll through the rest of this here. Public participation. Do we have any public that wants to participate today?
No general participation this evening.
Fantastic. So then we get into board matters. And what I'm seeing is we have elections, or so we want to welcome a new board member and then welcome and introductions.
Yeah, if you just, we did that at the beginning instead. Started
Got it.
earlier.
So welcome, Harriet. It's great. We like having a full board. It's honestly much more productive, and I think additional perspectives are fantastic to have. In the last, I think I've been on the board for 7, 8 years. I've never had a structural engineer on the board in the last 7 or 8 years. So I think that's going to be kind of fun and interesting. What we do have is, I think we're all architect members of this board now. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah. So everyone is an architect member. We do oftentimes have just community members that don't necessarily have professional training. I think there's spot for 2 of them on the board if someone has interest. Recently, our board chair had background in landscape architecture and land planning, but was not an active practicing professional in the design field. So again, welcome. And I think the structural specialty will be fascinating to kind of hear where some of our discussions will go. Board elections. So we're up. This is our sort of year cycle. Is that right, Kailani?
Yeah.
So I think typically it's a year long. It's not the duration of your term. I think we can sort of self-volunteer to, if you're interested in the position. It's both for chair and vice chair. And I think what would be handy for me to offer a little bit of perspective, just having been vice chair for the last 2 years, what that entails, some responsibilities, and then also, with Todd kind of chairing, but being less of a design professional, there's some redundancies sometimes in sort of communication and making sure that all of our ideas and thoughts were understood. So I think for starters, we have a weekly, we have a monthly pre-agenda meeting. So you have to participate on basically Tuesday before the Wednesday meeting. And we use that meeting, and I think it's been very helpful. Ideally, you'll have come prepared with the packet, and so either reviewed sort of the staff items and the project, or you can sometimes use that as your study hall class before the exam day the next day. But the goal is to kind of review all of the items that are priority from staff's comments and allot time blocks to how we're going to move through this. And DAB is notorious for just verbosity to, where we're sort of multiple hours, potentially callbacks, multiple days kind of stuff. And as enjoyable as that is, as the architect members, I think there's a lot of city staff and applicants and, ultimately client money that relies on us to be efficient. And so I think we've over the years tried different strategies to sort of drive efficiency through these meetings. And I actually think this pre-agenda meeting, although it requires another, half hour to an hour a month prior to the actual DAB meeting, is very useful. We don't want to necessarily over encumber our meetings to where, or our reviews to where we can't open up discussion. And I know you guys have probably noticed, like between Todd, mostly Todd, because he's running the meeting. So that's sort of the chair's responsibility, right? Is after these time blocks are allotted, he's kind of going through our meetings and making sure we're moving along, which, you could kind of consider yourself the fun police if that's something that interests you. But also just, sort of timekeeping in a way that's keeping people efficient. We like to go out on tangents, and again, we don't want to like keep ourselves in such tight bumpers that we can't sort of be creative, which is sort of the reason why we're here. But I do think striking that balance between sort of managing a meeting flow and schedule, but also still allowing productive conversation, that's sort of the chair's responsibility. All of that at the end of the meeting then comes to documenting it in a way that it can very easily become meeting minutes and clear directives for the applicants and or planning board, should any of our recommendations want to have sort of pending planning board overlays. Vice chair is kind of just there to support the chair, be another set of ears. For me, I felt like it was a little more duty just because Todd was not he wasn't professionally active the way we all are. And so sometimes translating our intent from conversations, vocabulary, lexicon, there was a layer of additional work there with Todd. But I think it's also fair and worth mentioning, Todd volunteered 2 years in a row for that because I think it gave him an opportunity to feel very useful in our meetings, because maybe he didn't have as much of the sort of vocabulary and critique criteria, but he also didn't get to participate as much in the discussion, right? Because he's there managing the discussion, trying to make sure he's hearing what everybody's saying properly. So I think, moving forward, a chair is sort of also acknowledging that they're doing some kind of double duty. So to be like fully invested into the project discussion and the sort of critique, balancing the fact that we still need documentation and sort of the record of that whole conversation. Should things get called up to planning board in a way that would require DAB presence, the chair's going to be who's going to be invited to those meetings. Now, I've filled in for Todd before when he was unable to make it. And I assure you, those planning board meetings, all 4.5 hours of them, where they may or may not ask you to opine on one thing and probably not, but you're teed up the whole time sitting there. It's really awesome. But I do think it's helpful when they do need color shed on what our comments were. And as you can imagine, depending on how good the notes are from what we've, from whoever the chair is, and with Todd, we had to clean up the minutes occasionally just to make sure the intent was clear. Even if planning board, even if the liaison's here and then goes back, it's helpful if it's a sort of high pressure, high critical decision item that our feedback is communicated clearly at their meeting. So being there as a resource, I think, sort of closes the loop from a recommendation back to implementation. So with all that being said, who would like to be the chair for the next year? Is there anybody that's interested in it? And is there any additional
You really
questions?
sold it, Rory. That was one of the best pitches I've heard.
Yeah, I was gonna say that in the last 3 years or 4 years or however long I've been on this board, it's the structure of our meetings has really, really changed. And I think the significant and hard part of, I think, the chair's role is distilling, an hour and a half to 2 hour long meeting into like 6 very clear, distinct sentences or directives. And I think that that's hard to, of the 1,000 words we say, to sort of distill it down to a very simple directive, I think was challenging. I think, hats off to Todd and to you, Roy, for pulling those together. But I also think that it's really important that, as a representative of our board, if we are called into a planning board meeting, that we do have like a broader recollection maybe of the meeting, that just because while the meeting is recorded, like a lot of the meeting is hyper distilled. So sometimes shedding additional light onto our conversation and the background of our recommendations is helpful to the planning board. So I feel like it's pretty tricky.
For sure. And to be honest, in reflection, I think there was one time that planning board asked for us over the last 2 years to be present in the meeting.
Yeah, I went to the Harvest House, the Millennial Harvest House planning meeting. I think you and Todd were busy.
Oh, got it. So there's been 2. So
Yeah.
it's not like every project we review, we end up needing to follow up at planning board. But yeah, I mean, to your point, that's why we would be there, right? Because the distillation is so thin that somebody's there to color it by the time they're going to codify it, right?
Right.
So Stephen, I know you also had some questions about like process, what's working, what's not, but I think ahead of that, we got to get through these elections here. Is anybody interested in putting their hat in the ring for chair and or vice chair of DAB for this new 2024-25 cycle?
And I'll just add to your, you'll have staff to help support you in those agenda meetings, and it's a half an hour on Tuesday. It's not a lot of extra work. So it'll be chair and vice chair with staff. And if it's a case manager on any project, that's also the time there that as you start to structure the design review and timing, you can ask for additional materials too. So
And typically,
But
agenda meetings don't run more than a half hour, right, Kalani?
half an hour, yeah. We try to keep it 25 minutes, half an hour to 25 minutes the day before.
What I found useful is, and I notice it is like a turning point in my participation in reviews, is that you get an opportunity to sort of preview and ask staff their intent behind some of their comments. And it's like a forced study session of going through the items, asking them some specific questions and clarity, so that by the time you're hitting the review, you've sort of cleared the runway as far as any ambiguity. And for me, it made my ability to sort of understand what the priorities were and sort of how to focus comments and discussion in a more productive way, that city staff felt like they were actually receiving that we were giving direction that was helping sort of clear their commentary.
Yeah, and I think that there's, I've always felt like there needs to be a fine line in those pre-meeting meetings between like maybe setting up the structure of the meeting and the timing of it, but not crossing the line into any review. And I know that's
Correct.
with you're asking for feedback, but I think in the meetings, there's also an opportunity to ask for clarification and feedback from staff. But if you can kind of get that beforehand, I think that's helpful.
So Rory and Brandon, are you guys interested?
I was going to open it up, guys, because I've been participating in the chair position for the last 2 years. So I didn't want to like feel over dominating. I also candidly, have a 3-month-old at home. So like my
Oh, okay.
participation and extracurriculars are starting to receive heat.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think Rory would make if you had the bandwidth or the time for it, I feel like it would make a lot of sense. Yeah, you have a tremendous amount of experience. If you wanted to be chair, and then I would, put myself out for the vice chair if nobody else wants to vie for it.
I definitely think I
Anybody
want
else?
to work in the background for my first year, so I'm not going to put my hand up for anything.
I think that's fair, Harriet. Stephen, I wasn't sure if you had interest, just because I know you've sort of taken an interest in some of our procedural items and kind of what works and what doesn't work sort of analysis.
I mean, I think you guys would be great, but if Rory, you don't want to, if you feel like you don't want to do it, I would back up Brandon as the vice chair, but it's up to you guys if.
That was maybe what I was going to offer is, I guess I haven't really thought it through too much. I'm worried about my schedule, just again, having sort of basically a newborn at my house. So it's quite unpredictable. And there's going to be over this next year, I'm sure a lot of sort of like managing childcare pickups and maybe missing meetings and shit. So I want to be careful about that. What I was going to offer is actually if somebody was interested that I would remain vice chair to continue to support with the experience I have, but not be in the primary seat as far as scheduling. And then obviously we can all debate, like Brandon stepped in when chair and vice chair were unable to make planning board. And as long as we're all communicating well, I think we can cover the bases, but then at least I'm still in those agenda meetings and can kind of transition the way we've approached them. And I think Brandon, you really good point. Like those meetings are not intended to be, preamble there, but it'll be interesting to see like if you have another set of eyes in those meetings based on the experience that I have with them for the last 2 years, how we want to sort of evolve the use of those. So if that makes sense, I don't know, Brendan, do you want to put your hat in for the chair and I'll be your vice chair to kind of keep things moving, and then Stephen, you can take a crack at it next year?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, I mean, I was
Go for it.
Yeah.
You were going for
I
vice chair?
Yeah, that's my head in.
Hey, it's just like Kamala. You just got
Right?
thrust into the.
We can do anything for a year, right? We can
It's
talk.
not as much work as you think. I think you'd be really good at it if you're interested in it. Just both in sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when Lauren was on the board and she struggled with being chair and like had a lot to say about the projects, but felt like just because she had the role of chair, she was limited to like she was taking notes and had to be listening and not participating quite as much as I think she would have otherwise. But I think I would like to, I think it would be a good challenge.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's it then. Do we have to like do some like ringing of a bell or something, Kalani?
Well,
Or a
yeah,
gavel?
I would definitely like to hear Matthews and you know, Stephen and Harriet's input and, you know.
I
If
think it
you,
makes perfect sense to me. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, for my part, I totally support that. I think it makes a lot of sense. Um, Given my tenure on this board, I would just say that like being the chair isn't really in my suite of of skills that yeah, so Brendan, I think you're very well attuned to when you read the packet, when it's coming in, picking up on some of the overriding issues and having some organizational thought around it. So I think that's very helpful. So it sounds like a great choice in my opinion.
right, yeah, the editor of meeting minutes.
No, I think you quickly pick up on the scope of the project in front of us, you know, at least when we've discussed things. So I think it'll work out great.
I don't really know any of you, but it makes sense to me that you'd keep people on that have the experience and but also come up with a bit of a transition plan to enable Rory to step back a little bit more.
So for formality, and if you guys don't, you're welcome to talk more about the chair responsibilities and if there's any questions for staff. Yes, you'll do need to make a motion and a second and vote on the chair and then make another motion and a second for the vice chair. And we also actually need you to vote on the minutes. I know you made motions, but we didn't actually get a vote either. So if we could, you could take care of all these three things in a row, and then we can close this business out. If you have any other
Got
questions.
it. So we had a motion to approve. So I guess let's go, but rewind. So
Yeah.
Stephen, you made the motion to approve. Would you go ahead and do that again?
Yeah, so I move that we approve the April 10th meeting minutes.
I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
I make a motion to approve the May 8th meeting minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
I,
I nominate Brendan Ash for chair of DAP. Do you have to second that or all in favor?
Aye.
and I'll nominate Roy for vice chair.
And I second that.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Oh, that's great. We only went over 3 minutes, guys. See these agenda meetings. Oh, and that was just me being late by 5 minutes. So I think that'll.
Yeah, look at that.
Okay. Then we were going to get into Stephen topic
Yeah.
additions. What's working, what's not, and then we'll do it. Let's just save a little bit of time for a calendar check.
Yeah, and I can just give a quick 10 seconds on what I was thinking. Really, just we don't get a chance to sort of like talk about, you know, how the board works or not work and you know, and I feel like we can also help as citizens like push the agenda, you know, like what projects would we like to see that we're not seeing or things like that. You know, and then even if that ends up being something we'd have to like go to the city council and say, hey, we really think we should expand to this or whatever, or maybe not, maybe we narrow it more. But I just felt like, you know, we never get a chance to kind of like, you know, talk about some of that stuff. So.
Stephen, I have one item that falls generally in that category. Not that we have to lead off with this, but it might also be of benefit to Harriet. And that would be how we try to achieve consensus or not. And so I know there are some projects where it's easy for us to come to consensus. There's been some projects where particular board members have had, you know, I wouldn't say disagreements, but certainly did not want to go along with the consensus of other board members. And I only bring this up for discussion in as much as I think ultimately the priority in my mind is we leave the applicant with a clear impression of if we want to steer them in a certain direction, or you know, give them something that they can constructively take back to their team. You know, I would just put it out there. What would you all feel would be the priority? Is it to naturally seek consensus, or to voice those differing opinions when we feel like they really matter?
I mean, are we required to reach consensus? I don't know. Are we? Is that
We're not required to do anything.
right? Yeah, I mean,
Required to reach consensus. You can have recommendations that, you know, many of you feel strongly about, but we do like to note if there's a strong feeling in other directions. You've noted other opposing views in some of your
Yeah.
I think it's helpful to have just some direction that either notes that for an applicant, like the board was had mixed opinions on a project, so that it carries forward to planning.
Yeah.
right.
That seems to be the most important piece, I think, that Matthew was touching on, is just clear direction, even if it's, hey, there were opposing viewpoints on the board, we did not reach consensus about the following. To me, it's strong, and sometimes we get caught up in our commentary of wanting to, like, at least from my perspective, like argue your position, or like present it or represent it or repackage sort of the way you're describing it in a way with hope of like reaching consensus. And, you know, I would say a lot of times we do sort of have consensus when it's really obvious stuff, right? That's lacking or whatever. And it comes down to the specificity of the guidance too. Like if the entry needs to be worked on, that's a very broad thing. But if one of us thinks it needs to be a horizontal plane that reaches out to grab you, and someone else thinks it needs to be a recess, we could kind of get caught in the weeds pretty quickly. What I do like though is that we've sort of all started to take a breath when we've found ourselves with opposing views, and just say, hey guys, it's okay that we have opposing views. Clearly, we're not going to reach consensus on this item. Let's move on. For the applicant, that's huge, because we don't want them to feel pressure to go with like one or two board members' ideas that they thought were sort of leading the charge. And we don't want to give, you know, planning board maybe the impression that there was consensus, or like confuse the applicant or planning board in that process. So to me, when we have opposing views, we state that it's okay that we have them and we move on. It basically says, hey, there's an issue around this item. We don't know exactly what you need to do about it, but there's still something that probably could be worked on there.
Right. And I think that along the same lines, if there's something that like staff doesn't, you know, like we disagree with staff or something, I think that's okay too. You know, I know that's maybe not so clear for the applicant, but that's sort of maybe important because it could highlight things that maybe in the code needs to be looked at. You know, if something isn't really making sense, but that's the criteria, you know, and we can be like, hey, this is a criteria, but boy, wouldn't it be better if we did this? And we note that, you know, and just get it in sort of the record that like, hey, maybe this is something that, you know, the city looks at in the future in terms of tweaking that particular criteria. I don't think it's come up so much, but I could imagine it could, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think when you know, planning staff presents us with a piece of a project that doesn't meet certain criteria, and then we can have a discussion about potentially adjustments that can be made in the design that can help the project address certain criteria, but it's also not necessarily our job to solve their problem. I mean, I think perfectly good, you know, perfectly good directive or suggestion is for the architect to go back and study this element, like that, you know, it needs to be addressed, and we're not here to solve it for you, but you just need to restudy it and rethink whatever the issue is, if it's entry or fenestration or whatever. So I think that that's okay, and I think that can be noted in the meeting minutes of the like solution to the issue with the board was in disagreement on how to resolve this issue, but these were some suggestions that were made, whatever.
Yeah, and the staff one, the one that's interesting to me, and this has been sort of on and off over the years, different board personalities, but on the one hand, we're sort of being tasked very specifically to review the criteria as it's worded in the code and interpret it through our professional lens of experience and opine on whether or not how we feel about it. And also specifically the items that staff is bringing to our attention. So I think there's kind of two things that break out of that is one, there's all these other things that we see that we're like, wait a second, how come you guys aren't commenting about how terrible that corner is or this or that use of material is just so bad. And so like, are we sort of broadening the scope, even though we've been sort of tasked with a particular set of items during their review that don't meet criteria? And that's kind of, they've worked really hard to kind of correlate that. Like Lauren, I guess you reminded me of when Lauren was on the board, Brandon, she was very adamant that like, yeah, they give us an outline of things that they think are deficient or whatever, but we're creative professionals and we're going to comment about whatever we want to. And then there was the next layer, which was, if you were to ask us as professionals, if we read the code, how would we interpret it? Doesn't necessarily mean we agree with it. So like, just because I found myself in some awkward positions over the years where it's like, well, if you're asking my opinion of how to interpret that section of code, then yes, I would agree that this should be done differently. But as an architect and a creative professional, I love what they did, even if it's in conflict with the code, and I'm in full support of it.
Right. Yeah,
I think that those were the days when our meetings were going like 5 hours. Our meeting minutes were insane, and our conversations were great, and I felt like we were really able to dig in and give a lot of feedback to the projects and the architects. But now I feel like we have it so structured that and I think staff is able to give us our packets a little bit earlier now, with the intention of us reviewing them and being able to say like, okay, this is the criteria that planning staff wants us to review, but I want to add this. So I think that it's important that we kind of do our homework ahead of time and early, and then keep the meetings still structured. Of course, I enjoy the discourse, and things come up in the meetings that oftentimes we'll get a planning package, and then the project has developed and evolved in the time between submittal of the package to the meeting, and so things will come up in the meeting for sure. But I do think it's important that we get the packets early, and then add feedback, or if there are items that we feel like, because we're looking at it through a different set of eyes, and now we have Harriet's structural engineering eyes, and it's a lot of the packet is was reviewed by planning staff. So I think it's important that we come at it from a different direction, and that's kind of why we're here and on this board. So
yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, one of the things that I thought about, like just with bringing this topic up, was some years ago, I went to a lecture at an AIA conference, and it was the dean of the School of Architecture in Wisconsin and Milwaukee. And they have a program there where the building department, planning department will give the architecture school projects to look at, kind of much more thorough version of what we're doing. And they said, what we're trying to do is take like F projects, F projects, and turn them into C projects. But what was so cool is they showed all these examples of like strip malls. And I mean, it was like bad stuff. It wasn't like, you know, the whatever, the Rock and Roll Museum. It was like, you know, bad stuff. And they showed like what they were able to achieve without adding more costs to the project, you know, just like really simple stuff. And it was like this super successful program because the developers and builders and stuff were like, oh, wow, this is great. We're getting like, you know, some free advice, but we're actually making the projects better. And it was like win, win, win all the way around. And it was kind of cool. So that's sort of like the context I was thinking about this larger question, like, hey, what could we, you know, yes, we have the criteria, but, you know, is there some, even within that, is there some little time, you know, whether it's 5 minutes or something set aside at the end of the thing, like, well, here's some other things that you could think about that are outside of the
I think you
criteria.
nailed it, Stephen. And that's sort of like, because Todd was very keen on trying to manage all of us. And
Right.
so he was always like very adamant in the pre-agenda meeting of like, okay, and then do you think 15, 20 minutes is good for, open the discussion? And it's, but I do think it's important to, at the very end of the project or the end of the review, to absolutely take it out of the criteria. And I think what, Brendan, what the task in front of us as we sort of take this into the next year of process is, how strict do we want to be with following, hey, staff, did you get everything you need? I do feel like it's very nice to acknowledge staff during these meetings and like, hey, is this discussion trending in a way that's going to be useful to your next steps? And if we can be efficient in getting through sort of what they need us to, then I think we have more time to have those sort of creative discussions that are less tied to some criteria. So it's almost, the onus is almost on us to sort of motivate ourselves to get through staff requests quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, Rory, I would add to that, our main constituency isn't staff and it isn't the applicant, it's the public. And so I think procedurally, yes, we have to answer the criteria for very practical reasons. We have to honor the applicant's time and effort and understanding of the project. Ultimately, if we need to take a departure from those very strict lanes in favor of looking at this from a public perspective, as a project that exists within the public realm, even if it's not our exact purview, we should indulge sometimes in talking about the broader context of the project. So, whatever the right percentage of all those three constituencies balances may vary depending on the project, but I think there really are multiple perspectives we have to take.
I mean, that's a huge point, is that, like appeasing staff is not the intent, but moving through their items, even if it was, hey, item one, we don't agree that this is deficient. Like, we don't have to agree with them or appease them. We just want to be definitive as we move through the things that they think are holding up the final review of the project. But I think that's a very valid point to bring up, is exactly who we represent.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think thinking back to, the controversial project with St. Julian, right? That was one that was sort of like, we had a lot of disagreement. There's a lot of interesting layers and blah, blah, blah. But I think we did a really good job of sort of giving some great feedback and moving through it. But there was one point I know in my mind, I was just like, well, the elephant in the room is that the floodplain, the way Boulder interprets these draconian rules, is making the urban condition horrible along the street front, because we got this 4-foot wall that they're like stuck dealing with. And it was sort of like, well, as the public, we really should be addressing that issue and pushing back on the city and be like, hey, FEMA lets you decide how you interpret these rules. There isn't anything that you can't do. You're just chosen, that you can't put a park bench because it's going to get washed away, right, in a major flood. But I think that was an important one where like the discussion could have gone to like, hey, this is a big like public project, and this really comes up against like some issues that aren't great in our code that we should be looking at. But
Yeah, that makes me nervous. Like, it opens up such a huge can of worms. I think we get direction from planning staff because they're enforceable items. I mean,
Sure.
our board is not, it, is non-binding recommendation. So I think it's important that we come from it, not from, the need to have enforceable suggestions because ours are not, but I think we need to come from it from like several different angles and address, but I also don't think, I think we can't necessarily question like overall building zoning maps and FEMA's floodplains. And I
But
just
if
think
we don't, who does?
Planning board,
planning
planning
board,
board.
Yeah,
looks
but
at-
planning board doesn't necessarily have this, I mean, quite frankly, do they necessarily have the technical skills? I mean, they're a different
true.
animal.
It's
I
true.
mean, I think this is a great opportunity for some, I'm not saying that we're like activists and we shut not that, but it would be nice if we could point out like, hey, is this really like, could staff go and look at this, like this particular rule and why? I don't know.
And I think what you bring up is interesting. Is sort of historically, I would argue that Kalani would say, well, we can have a retreat and we can talk about these things, and then we can write our letter to the city council once a year and explain to them that we think the floodplain should change for important buildings downtown. Just use the one example. That's sort of the forum. Now, to your point, like it's like, where else is this dialogue happening? And we are sort of a perfect group to have this conversation. I guess just being cognizant that we don't want it to derail sort of keeping these projects moving, and that we can document it. And I think that's a great example you brought up with St. Julian edition. And so let's say we, at the end of it, we're having sort of a folly fodder and talking about like, well, if we weren't sort of subject to this, which we think is a silly rule, that can get captured in the minutes, but again, shy of like writing a letter to somebody, and this is what, Kalani and previous planning board liaisons have always been very adamant about, is like figure out how to get it in a form like a sound bite or a word bite or whatever, that planning board can make it a contingency of approval. Like that's sort of like our little cheat code, and Brad's got his hand up here, but that's our little like, if we can get a little nugget to be sort of a condition of approval in the language with planning board, that's how we can start to have a little more teeth in those.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just feel like it's, as if I was a city council member, I would look at like, well, where can I get ideas to make changes, beneficial changes? This would be a place, I would think.
That's why they ask us for a letter every year. Have they not
Right.
responded to it?
Right.
Brad, why don't you?
And maybe we keep track of these things as we go, and we make sure that it's in that letter. But, all right, I'll be quiet.
Brad, are you trying to say something here?
Yeah. I didn't want to interrupt, and in general, we don't want to interrupt the conversation between board members, but also want to be supportive of some of the conversation. And I thought it might be useful for me to give you perspective of how I have experienced a version of this conversation with other boards, well, frankly, and councils throughout my career, but with the planning board and with council, it's not unusual for a council member to say, either actually in a meeting or even offline, something like, hey, I understand this is a criteria-based quasi-judicial decision that I need to make, and I'm going to make it, but I don't like this rule, or I don't like this law. What do I do about it? And they do have mechanisms for raising that up. It's more art than science, but they will do that through their annual council retreat, and maybe the most formal way, where they pare down a list of 10 top priority policy items typically policy items for the year. But they also do it through more frequent opportunities, such as what's called a nod of 5. That's to give direction to look into researching a particular policy change, or it can even be, you know, depending on the scope of it, just inquiry. And one of the things I remind them, and I'll just share with all of you, is we are constantly hearing the conversations that take place in board meetings, and we are not, you know, mindless drones who just cast it aside when it's said. We have a kind of running awareness of topics that are of interest. We kind of weigh that with what we're maybe hearing out in the community on a basis, what we hear through applications, like, oh, this seems onerous, this doesn't seem consistent with best practices. So know that none of your conversation, even if it's you know, a specific point being made or not to staff, goes unappreciated or unrealized. We are constantly kind of scanning the horizon for what topics need to be lifted up, maybe by staff as emerging issues. But I would say that, you know, as you think about those things, there are some mechanisms Kalani and other staff are able to convey to me and to at the staff level. Hey, this seems to be really an issue. Are there different ways we could pursue it? So that's one mechanism, is to just highlight that to Kalani and others during a meeting. Certainly you're making comment to recommendations or observations to an applicant and a planning board member, or the planning board.
Yeah, and I think the one
noted in
thing,
their comments, and then, you know, I understand the kind of thought of like, and if it's actionable, to put it in kind of in a way that then could be picked up as a condition of approval, or just something else that the planning board might act on. So just a
I
little
think-
perspective to share with you all.
that's great perspective. Thank you, Brad. I think with the sort of, we've got a time check here, so we got 5 minutes allocated, and we need to do a calendar check for our next round of meetings. The one thing I will say to sort of continue the ... in that conversation is, we do have a retreat coming up. And this is exactly the type of conversation that we want to have during the retreat, Stephen, where we can sort of like take a broader look at how we behave in, you know, within the city of Boulder, within the other boards and coalitions, with staff, you know, larger sort of broader abstract topics. I would like our letter to be acknowledged by city council, though, so it doesn't just feel like you're writing Santa Claus and you don't know what you're gonna get under the tree, you know? Even just say, hey, guys, we really appreciate your letter. Very thoughtful, blah, 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 you know, just that, anyways.
Yeah, and
Count-
I think
I
a
was
second
gonna add-
opportunity, another opportunity is, you know, the Boulder Junction Phase 2 Joint Board was a
Mhm.
huge opportunity for us as designers to have a conversation with the other boards about the planning of these developments. And, you know, that's when the conversation is had as to like fenestration requirements and retail requirements and pedestrian requirements, and all in that very early stages. It's cool to be, you know, to have someone on from our board with a design perspective, design professionals, to come in and give some insight, I think, to the projects, because that's where the change happens, not necessarily in our
Right, during.
letter to council.
And yeah, and I think this is a great discussion. If you guys don't mind, if we sort of pack it for a retreat, I don't know exactly, I think we're gonna talk about some of these dates here, but which particular calendar check are we doing here, guys?
That's typically just on our agenda in case we have a meeting next month. So we don't have a calendar check for today. We don't have a.
When is our retreat scheduled for? Or
We,
when are we targeting scheduling it?
after the new year, because we're in the middle of some board and commissions work right now, and
Okay.
we need to see how that work, and some of the direction from the city manager's office might help format some of your discussion at a retreat. We would do
I
that.
think so. And
But I think
Stephen,
we should keep some ideas together and know, like, if there's someone that wants to start keeping some topic areas, we'll also have some things for that retreat to
the
bring up.
biggest thing that came out of similar discussions, Stephen, was that planning board and our relationship has gotten much stronger. And I think even having ML on the board, she acknowledged that, and that making sure our bridge to planning board, that was like a huge, you know, when I first joined, it felt very severed, and and the discussion was always, how do we have more influence? How do we see more projects? How do we whatever? And that was a big thing that came out of it, was planning board, strengthen your relationship with planning.
Right. And I just want to say one last thing, about all this. It would be great, in terms of like, and I think about like what's working, what's not working. And in some ways that I think not working, if you will, is, boy, it'd be great to see things earlier in the process, so that, it's difficult to go start talking about, oh, you got to do this. And it's like, I know how far, they're almost in the CDs and we're like, oh, just make this little roof change. A, and then B, I'm very much like an old Clinton Democrat, broken windows kind of guy. Like, I would love to see smaller projects that we could have a bigger impact on. Yes, I understand there's St. Julian, those things are important projects, but in a way, a lot of that is, they're going to take what we say with a grain of salt. But if we had a duplex that someone was doing in a new neighborhood, we could really help them, and help that process. And
Yeah, Matthew, you would love that, right? Your clients would be stoked if they had to pay you to come sit in front of us to deal with a duplex fee. All right, Stephen, let's be respectful of our allotted time here today.
Sure.
And that's perfect discussion to have at our retreat, and to continue to have sort of in the free board that we're gonna try, that Brendan and I are gonna continue to evaluate how to incorporate these sort of free board discussion time allotments. But I appreciate everybody's involvement today. I think we got through our agenda relatively quickly. Kailani's smiling. That feels like maybe a win.
You were very.
And it's a pleasure to welcome Harriet and to meet folks like Brad, who I've never seen here before. So, and Amelia, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to working with you as well. And Christopher, we won't leave you hanging.
And thanks. And in-person meetings, COVID's over. We don't need to be doing this anymore. I know it's easier for all of us, but Jesus, it's so much better when you do stuff in person. I'm just sort of sick of Zoom, like it's just.
It's a good question. Yeah.
So-
We'll chat. Let's continue to think about that. So, all right, I guess formally, I'm going to make a motion to adjourn this meeting. Is that how that works? I don't have a
Yep.
gavel or anything, but yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We'll catch you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.